a news story that was put out by the New Zealand Initiative a month ago. So good on the New Zealand Initiative. Who's the New Zealand Initiative? It's a sort of centre-right think tank in New Zealand, mainly staffed by academics and people who have quite a bit of sway. I guess we'd know it as the old Business Roundtable. So it's sort of reconstituted itself into something called the New Zealand Initiative, except it's broadened its range. It's not just about commercial matters and matters that might affect corporate or commercial New Zealand. It's about, it looks at the whole of New Zealand.
I'm a great believer in at least read the conspiracy theories, Michael, before you condemn them. So when I have condemned Liz Gunn this morning, for example, on this show, and I have condemned her videos, and they are trying to perpetrate what they say as factual information when it's actually and completely bollocks. So they're lying. I mean, Liz Gunn's a liar. If you are going to lie in the hope of getting some sort of, I don't know, political or commercial support, then it doesn't matter who you are. You need to be called out irrespective of where you sit on the political spectrum. That's fine.
And from the Save Refinery, people from Save Marsden Point, we are joined by Brad Flutie. Brad, thank you for talking to us. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Now, that's not a problem. Now, you've been looking for traction for a long time. Nobody's been taking you very seriously, and then suddenly this happens. This must confirm every threat that you have posed in the past. You must be feeling, I told you so.
Yeah, it doesn't actually feel good to be in the realm of I told you so, because what it means is that a lot of people are going to suffer needlessly when we could have just investigated the concerns to begin with and to evaluate its merit.
Now, the shutdown is complete as I understand it. I was listening to one of the chief executive, the former assistant chief executive of Marsden Point, who said that there is no way in the world, because of what they've done over the last 6 months, you could put that refinery back together. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, if that was the case, that would have been our standpoint when it was a sand pile and it eventually turned into a refinery. Look, the fact is that if someone believes that it's not possible to reinstate it, that doesn't automatically eliminate the need to reinstate it.
No, he didn't say that. Sorry, perhaps I misinterpreted to you what he said. What he said was that dismantled it so completely that the idea that you can just start refining again tomorrow or even next year is impossible. You actually almost need to start from scratch. That's the point he was making.
We've talked to operators who have worked in there, and they agree it would take about 2 years to reinstate. But that doesn't matter. Our point is still, you're still going to need to reinstate it. I mean, the avgas issue that we're experiencing right now is just one of the issues that we're dealing with across the board.
Just explain to us, because a lot of people sort of hear this on the periphery, and it only comes in our scope, if you like, when something like, oh, we can't fly home for Christmas comes to roost.
Yeah.
Marsden Point was owned by the government. It was constructed, I think, in the early 1960s, owned by the New Zealand government. When was it sold to the private sector?
Sold to the private sector. Essentially, its shares were turned into private shares, and it was done around the Rogernomics era where they were privatising a lot of things. And you'll remember that not long after that there was a share market crash. So people were getting tight in the pockets, much like they are now, and oil companies were quite happy to buy up those shares for prices that were probably a little bit more than what they were worth at the moment. So essentially what happened to the refinery is it stopped being something owned in its majority by the public, and it being a piece of infrastructure that was going to supply fuel for the public's needs, or rather the nation's needs, to being something that was supposed to service global needs. Now, do we have the same climate conditions and needs as the rest of the world? No, and we're starting to see that now. Imported bitumen doesn't go so well with our climate, doesn't last very long. Avgas that's transported in ships that are getting water in it that can't be refined when it gets here, they can't be used in ships, and now that hundreds and thousands of litres is supposedly needing to be dumped. So the problem with a lot of these issues when we get rid of infrastructure that makes things that we need is we don't notice the problems until they're smacking us in the face. But some of us have been trying to warn. The Digging at Marsden have been trying to warn people. Operation Good Oil has been trying to warn people. Liz Gunn has investigated our concerns and put an interview up there. You know, we need to talk about this stuff so we can avoid tripping over into potholes and landing on our face. It doesn't matter how offensive it might be to people who have a climate ideology. We still need to talk about it, and we still need to make sure that we're making decisions that are practical and look after our people first.
Well, it's interesting in actual fact, because you're absolutely right. It was the Labour government, I think the fourth Labour government between 84 and 90, that privatised, they transferred the assets to the New Zealand Refining Company Limited.
Yeah.
But that consortium was the petrol retailers, BP, Mobil, Z Energy, are currently, as I understand, the major shareholders of that.
Yeah, Mobil, BP, and it was Z Energy, but Ampol owns Z Energy. They also have the monopoly on bitumen imports too.
But what I didn't realise was that the Marsden Point oil refinery is responsible for supplying about 85% of all the country's jet fuel. So it's a massive amount, and it's so ultimately dependent. 67% of diesel, about 60% of all petrol, all fuel oil for ships as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask the question of you? So your aim of your campaign is to re-establish a state-owned oil refinery at Marsden Point?
Look, we've investigated that. That could be an option, and if other advocacy angles want to advocate for that, that's fine. We've looked into it a little bit deeper, and we've asked the question, will that actually solve the problem that we have now? And the answer is, well, probably not, because it was a state-owned enterprise. What we didn't have is a set of parameters or constraints seen as this is our only energy infrastructure for hydrocarbons.
Sorry, what do you mean? What do you mean? What's the problem with being a state-owned enterprise?
The problem with the state-owned enterprise is if the state-owned enterprise decides that because of climate change that the production of hydrocarbons is no longer required, even though most of us still drive hydrocarbon-based vehicles, they wouldn't be able to do that because it's the only piece of infrastructure that refines hydrocarbons. So it doesn't matter who owns it. If it's not constrained from being torn down, stripped out, had its refining capabilities removed, and then this prospect of turning it into a solar panel farm, if you didn't have anything that said, no, you can't do that because we're reliant on fuel still, so we need to keep producing enough and have that security of supply here, then it doesn't matter who owns it, right? If an oil company or public shareholding or a state-owned enterprise can do that to your only piece of refining infrastructure, then you're still down a creek without a paddle. So it doesn't matter who owns it. It's about the constraints that you put in on whether it be sabotaging or undermining that piece of infrastructure. So we're getting awareness out there. Three things. We want the refinery reinstated. We want the people of this country to get behind that. And we want constraints put in to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because most people would agree with me that these problems that are hitting us in the face now because of poor decisions could have been stopped if we had that conversation at that point in time before these problems started hitting us in the face. That's what constitutions are for. They're meant to warn people that certain actions could lead to these consequences.
That said, really, if you'd need a change of philosophy, would you? So is your argument that you're running up against, if you like, some woke green sensibilities here?
No, I don't think so. I've actually said a few times that I used to be a climate change idealist. I used to be a climate change activist. What I really wanted is I wanted people to be more responsible towards the environment. But it was my perspective was framed for me, I believe, for a certain gain. And what I've come to realise is that getting rid of obtaining energy from hydrocarbons is not going to solve our environmental problems. We need to be more mindful in terms of how we harvest energy out of things so we can develop a mindful and evolved society. But I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I don't have any debate with the white woke climate change ideologists. I don't need to disagree that climate change is a thing. I just need to say, well, hang on a sec. Does us doing this actually help solve climate change? And I've talked to people who believe in climate change. We had a meeting in Whangarei where a guy was putting up and we ended up agreeing with each other. He stated that getting rid of the refining capabilities from Marsden Point doesn't make one iota of difference to our climate change problem. So I don't have an argument with him. It's not about that. It's having a conversation based in integration and where we figure out how do we make this piece of refining infrastructure work better with our surroundings and how do we reduce its emissions? How do we use its emissions? Do we have the technology for that? I'm not interested in proving climate change wrong. I just want to make sure that we're not undermining everything else in our attempt to hypothetically solve climate change.
Okay. Now, forgive me for asking this question, but I need to. Brad, you're in a bit of trouble, well, you were in a bit of trouble within the courts over that mask incident, you know. Does that in any way, has that affected your ability to advocate with the media? Not up here. The Northern Advocate has been rather fair to me. I think that mainstream media, in terms of that incident and many of the ways that they've framed me, have misrepresented my views. I think it would be better if they actually had the conversation with me and gave me the right of reply. I've been labelled an anti-vaxxer. I'm certainly not that. I have a relative who works in health and safety standards, and I knew that the responses that we were rolling out in those certain areas were flawed. And I pushed back against that, and I tested that, and I have an opportunity in the court to get some views out there that may not have been heard widely. So, a lot of people say that I'm in trouble. I see it as an opportunity. So, Brad, it was to do with wearing a mask, and there was a sort of an altercation that took place to do with the state of the year. A week before the court, has the case finally been heard and a verdict provided?
No, it'll be heard on the 14th of December in the Whangarei District Courts.
Oh, okay. Well, you'll be a bit anxious about that. That's a week to go then.
I'd be more anxious if I wasn't prepared.
Have you still got your friend, Mr.
Diabakta?
I always mispronounce that.
That's all right.
Vinay, anyhow, is he helping you?
Yes, he's been great assistance. Vinay Diabakta from the Professional Mackenzie Friends.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yes, no, I've done that job many times myself as a Mackenzie friend.
Oh, good on you.
But can I also ask you, just to explain to our listeners, you got tasered. Did it hurt?
No, the taser's fine. You don't want to be pepper sprayed. So the first one I had to snap the cables off to stop the charge coming through, and the second one, it was actually a pretty good shot. I was trying to walk back to my car, but yep, that dropped me. It's actually quite useful if you're actually dealing with an aggressive individual. I think pepper spray just makes people angrier. It's not the best tool in the toolbox.
You think in this particular... Well, and I have to say, I guess all that's going to be playing out. 14th of December. Is it a day? Have you got a day trial, have you?
It might take 2 days, it might take one. It all depends on whether the judge is satisfied with what he's heard.
It's judge alone, is it?
Yes.